Well, thank you for joining us today. My name is Lil Mills. I'm the Dean of the McCombs School of Business, and I am so pleased to be here today with two business leaders that Texas can be proud of. Both James Hackett and Robert Rowling started their careers in the oil and gas business and went on to diversify their career paths in a variety of ways. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves with the highlights you want the audience to know. A little bit about where you began work and where you work now and your primary focus. And Bob, I'll start with you at the end and then move to Jim.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be here. And thank you, Senator Hutchison. I think she's still there. So some of you that were here last night, you may be bored with some of my answers because there might be some repetition here. But I went to Texas, got a business degree here, petroleum land management, went on to law school, practiced law for a little more than a year at Anderson Kurth in Houston. And my dad had a discovery. He's a geologist, and had a discovery that I thought was good enough for me to leave the practice of law and join him. So I was the sixth employee in Corpus Christi. And we built when I went to work for him, there were 4,000 rigs running. Within a year after I got there were 1,000. The business just basically collapsed in the early 80s. But we had this one discovery that was providing us cash flow. So we put 5 rigs to work during the 80s, drilling all over South Texas and Central Texas, and sold our business to Texaco in 1989 for almost $500 million. And that happened literally. We went from my dad grew up, he lost his job when I was 10. So he was a struggling geologist, and then he had this discovery, and he was a heck of an oil finder. And back in those days, the energy business was exploration. Today it's more mining, honestly. But anyway, so we did that, and then I've gone on. We then moved into the Gulf of Mexico, drilled, I don't know how many, lots of wells in the Gulf over the next 10 or 15 years. Sold most of that to Unocal. But in the meantime, we built a midstream business. We had the pipeline that goes from Waha. It was a 36-inch line, went from Waha to the ship channel. It moved about over a BCF a day. We had 2 or 3 natural gas processing plants. We had gathering systems everywhere. And I said last night, and I'll say it again, we sold it to Pacific Gas and Electric, I think for about $400 million. It's the one business I wish I had never sold. I would still love to be in the midstream business. And then along the way, we bought banks, and I started buying hotels. And I was telling people last night, there's no plan on any of this. We just looked for opportunities, and as opportunities came along, we invested. I'd like to say we had a master plan, but we bought 8 hotels just because they were cheap. And then Omni came up for sale. And we paid about $500 million for Omni, and the reason we liked it a lot is they had a lot of owned real estate, the Berkshire in New York City, the Shoreham in Washington, D.C., the Parker House in Boston. This was owned real estate, and we liked that. And so we built Omni now. We have about 57 or 58 hotels, most of which we own. And that's where I spend most of my time. We also have a pretty large real estate development company that invests in the DFW area. And then we have a private energy group that we invest in all kinds of different small businesses. So I spend my time, my son is basically taken over running the business, Blake, who's a UT Business School graduate. And I spend my time trying to help him and philanthropy and politics.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Jim?
Well, I'll also thank Senator Hutchison, although I don't know whether I should be calling her ambassador, which is the higher ranking title, whichever it is. This is a real testament to her and to UT. And I know a number of you in the room, and I'm very glad to be hanging out with you all. Bob actually is a business person. I have no clue what I'm doing. I went to work in the oil business to use my Russian language skills. I couldn't spell oil and gas, but it's like a lot of things in life. If you end up in something that's got a good mission, you'll find some things that can make it into a vocation. And I ended up loving the engineering and business aspects of this company I joined. It was the old Amoco, is now part of BP. And it was a very virtuous global company. I was very fortunate to end up there. And so I ended up going back and studying engineering because I fell in love with that piece of the business. from not knowing anything about it. And I was actually scared of big business, and it worked out. But my stuff, like I was making thousands of dollars when he was making hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think I'd follow him. And Bob, by the way, for those of you, it didn't come, if you weren't at dinner, he built one of the buildings that I teach in here at UT, and I have to thank him every single time for that building, because it is, if you haven't been in that space, it's just so great to walk into it and feel the natural light and the beauty of it. So we're all very grateful at UT for what he's done for his alma mater. Other than that, I'm currently like, nothing in between there matters to all of you. The thing that I'm most proud of is I'm married to my high school sweetheart, and we have 4 kids, and they're, thank God, all of them in Houston close to us. And I grew up the son of an insurance salesman and a full-time mother, working mother. So I have no reason to even be here, and I thank God for it.
He didn't tell you he ran our Anadarko.
Well, I have to say, piling on with how grateful we are for Rowling Hall next door, where our graduate programs are. And I know y'all know Jim and Miriam Mulva. We are tearing down the Dobie parking garage to pop up Mulva Hall. So the entire business school, the McCombs School of Business, owes huge gratitude to the oil and gas industry. I want to talk some about the Texas economy. I often say there's no place I'd rather be a business school dean, because we're enjoying the tailwinds of wealth and headquarters moving here, because we have a 0% personal income tax rate and a pretty friendly regulatory environment. Jim, let's start with energy, and why is Texas a great place to locate an energy company in any segment of the energy industry?
Well, I think the magic words you used were any segment, because we've seen that Texas has been very receptive to energy transition technologies as well. Not only those investments that are being made by the historic traditional energy providers that have always found a home in Texas, but to those who are startups, those who are doing things that we didn't used to do at all. Now, every time we think about wind and solar, I think we probably think of like Europe or California. But I think most of you in this room know that we are a globally important player in Texas in wind and solar. But I would also give you a perspective. We were doing that back in the days he was talking about. Amoco actually had a solar and wind business that didn't work. They tried forever, and we'll talk more about that if we discuss political risk. But I'm glad that we are supporting it here. It's working. It has all those challenges that Dr. Michael talked about with regard to how do we get the electricity to the right places at the right time, the right cost, without putting too much into it that is not market-based. But Texas does have both, as we all know, a manageable cost of living. It has a highly educated workforce. It does have a supportive regulatory environment. But mainly, it's a can-do attitude that I think all of us who came here from somewhere else really see as palpable, which is the support of people who want to do something cool in their lives and to be free to do that, and have people think that it's cool that they're doing it, and they didn't have to be born here to do it. And all of that, I think, redounds to the benefit of Texas. Now, one warning is complacency, politically particularly, because what has enabled Texas to be so great wasn't in place even when the oil business was booming back in the late 70s and early 80s before it collapsed in the period Bob was talking about. When I was in a gas marketing job, we wouldn't sign a single contract that had a court dispute that was adjudicated in the state of Texas. We would do New York before we would do Texas, which tells you how bad it was back then in terms of litigation. That has been solved through tort reform in Texas. That's the one thing we can't give up on, or this state will go into a different place than we currently enjoy. Thank God we're not there.
So, Bob, you've had a more diversified movement in your family business. What can you tell this audience about why Texas is attractive to all the other industries besides just energy?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Jim says is exactly right. I think we have hotels in 30 states, and in every one of them, we're all the time we're asking for a permit to do this, expand this, tear this down, replace this, build new. So my point being, the regulatory environment in Texas is so much better than virtually every other state. Maybe Florida's good, Texas is great, but you go someplace like California and look at the regulatory environment there, what they're having to put up with. Electricity prices, home electric prices, in 10 years in California are up 140%. They were up 12% last year because they're trying this Green New Deal, which doesn't work. They're shutting off fossil fuels. By 2035, you won't be able to buy a gas combustion engine, internal combustion engine. That's the law. That's on the law right now. So the regulatory scheme, I mean, our politicians aren't perfect, but they're pretty dang good when you compare them to other places in terms of allowing business to take place. And I also echo Jim, I think the greatest strength we have in Texas is the people, the can-do attitude, welcoming. It's just like in Dallas and it's all over Texas. It's just unbelievable how lucky we all are to be in this state. And it's not just the energy. It's Toyota moved, and obviously Chevron just announced they're moving. Finally, when we sold our business to Texaco, took back stock, and of course Texaco merged with Chevron. So I've been close to the Chevron, and they finally got smart a couple of months ago and announced they're moving out of California. And but it's just the environment here. We are so lucky to have it, but you're right. We need to keep it.
I want to turn some to your leadership styles and cultures within your company. I know I've got both students and young executives here. What can you teach us about how you lead your companies and what culture you've built, either Jim at Anadarko or Bob across the Omni or the energy space?
One is that I think those that are committed to making organizational cultures kind of adapt to what the environment they're in is, and to be successful in a very uncommon way, it's going to take time, right? We all know that who have done it within our own companies. I saw Jeff Hildebrand earlier. He is a great example of somebody who spends time thinking about what culture he's going to have inside of his company. And I suspect Jeff did that from the get-go. I can tell you, coming into a company and trying to change one that is not functionally at full throttle takes a while, and it then needs to be nurtured and not taken for granted once you correct it. But I think it starts with having very clearly articulated missions and values. It obviously takes acting consistently with that formulation, because actions are twice as loud as words. And we've seen companies like Enron who had the words stunningly and didn't act in accordance with those words. So you need to hold yourself accountable and ask people to hold yourself accountable, and then continue to weed out bad leaders, because that's what destroys jobs. And let people know that it's not just about soft things in life, it's about hard things in life. So one of the values we had at a company I was fortunate enough to lead was commercial focus. And within commercial focus, we would have things like get results, like that's really important. Holding each other accountable is really important. The people who invest in your company, the communities in which you operate, they need to have accountability within your organization, or they don't get what was promised to them. And you can't be in a position where you can't do that for them if it's at all possible. Another one is that you welcome disagreement, which is actually one of the most important cultural attributes. Some of you have maybe read Patrick Lencioni on The Advantage, but he talks about something that I've always thought was really important and really hard to do is how do you create professional debate at a table inside an organization, for-profit, non-for-profit, from people who come from different places, different backgrounds, different boxes of learning from experiences, and welcome that. So we would regularly say, it was a mantra within this company, if you're over 21 and you don't have an opinion, you're being paid too much money. Then you put the values into your performance reviews. and you make sure people know you're serious about developing others, making sure the culture is right, leading well, are things that they're actually evaluated on. And so it's a deliberate, intentional effort that needs constant nurturing and sometimes an evolution based on what is going on inside the company and outside of the company. I don't know if that's...
Yeah. I may have a follow-up, but I want to hear Bob.
Yeah, well, we try to use the model. We use it all the time with our company. We call it servant leadership. That means the job of every leader, including me, is we're here to serve our associates and to serve our customers. And some of that stuff involves we don't like we have a very flat structure. In other words, general managers at our hotel are free to call anybody in our company, including me, or they don't have to go just the person that they report to. They're free to call anybody. So we try to develop a very flat structure with, and we tell our general managers, your job is to serve not only our customers, but also your associates that work every day. In our business, at Omni, we have obviously banquet servers, housekeepers, and for a lot of them, the 8 or 10 hours they spend working for us is the best 8 or 10 hours of their day. We give them a meal. They're going home to all kinds of dysfunction and problems. So we try to make that. We try to serve them in their jobs, and it works when you empower an associate. We have something called the Power of One, which means anybody in our company has the power. They're vested with the power to make decisions that would benefit either their coworkers or our customers. So, the servant leadership model is what we try to kind of hang our hat on.
Well, I'm taken by this idea of how do you express reasoned opinion and disagreement in all facets of life, and I think it's a political challenge for our country at the moment. Wayne Peacock is the CEO down at USAA, and he said to me about a year ago that the reason we all need to get back to the office is not because his friends in commercial real estate need us all to go back to the office, although I know they want us to. He said it's the water cooler effect, that during COVID, we spent too much time alone spinning into the tails of the social media, where I no longer know people who think differently from me and my tribe on social media. When I'm in the office, I might think, well, I don't like people like Jim Hackett, but I like Jim Hackett. And the need to interface with each other means we're not othering the opposite opinion in anywhere near as destructive the same way. And I found that really powerful, that just being in community with each other makes it possible to cautiously express a different point of view, and it doesn't turn into an explosion. So I'm wondering if you have any similarly hopeful thoughts for political divisions as we get back in community with each other.
Can I try that, Bob? Okay, I'm teaching in UGS right now, and the first class we had 3 weeks ago, I told my students, who are all in the signature program, which a number of you know is a unique feature of UT, all entering first years in this particular case. I said, now you may have heard of safe spaces before. This is a safe space, but it's different than the safe spaces you've had described to you. Safety in our case does not deal in microaggression avoidance. Safety in our case means you are safe to express your opinion, to disagree. And the reason why you need to do that here in the classroom is so that you know what each other stands for, so that you can build hopefully a lifelong connection of people who you respect their thought process, but they may have different opinions on very important subjects like philosophy, moral philosophy, religion, politics. So we use our readings to talk about the subjects which a lot of people don't like to talk about. And we do it intentionally because it's a very important professional skill set to get good at, to be able to disagree with each other respectfully. And by the way, all young people should learn very early on the difference in niceness and kindness. And we can talk more about that later, but that has something to do with this topic.
So I'll give you a real life example of this. Most of you know, or many of you know, that the Board of Regents established the first new college at Texas other than Dell in some 40 years this last year. It's called the School of Civic Leadership. So Jay Hartzell asked me to serve on the search committee along with Senator Hutchison. And so the way the system works is that the faculty council selects a number of representatives, and then President Hartzell appoints a number of representatives and some students. Well, suffice it to say, in fact, Jeff Hildebrand was on I think he's here, he was on the committee as well. So suffice it to say that I probably had about zero in common with these faculty members. And I thought it was going to be the most contentious. This thing went on for 6 months, and we had meeting after meeting after meeting. And I'm going to tell you, our conversation, we all ended up loving or liking each other. And it was almost cathartic. It was so, and we all said, well, this is what the School of Civic Leadership can do. We're going to have colleges today, as we've seen, have become illiberal. The old definition of liberal is telling both sides of the story and not shooting each other over it. And so it was a real life example, though, of how you can get in a room with somebody you have nothing in common with, you disagree on 90% of the things, but you can have a courteous discourse. Right. And it was really, I think all of us came away from that feeling like, wow, this really works.
Can I just add one thing there?
Sure.
I'm actually teaching at Justin's request. Justin Dyer, who Jeff and he found to run the civic leadership program, which he's trying to get the major approved. And the reason why I'm teaching it is because he is committed to what you described. So I'm not in Plan 2 or in the MBA program because of that. And I'll keep helping him when I can. But I think it's great you all did that. I actually was on the faculty at ASU, which is where this idea originally came from. It's my wife was an alma mater of that school.
So if you haven't met him, the dean of that new college is Justin Dyer. He was here last night, might be around today. But we also have here the dean of the LBJ Policy School, J.R. DeShazo, who is also a smart, carefully reasoned, wonderful to talk to
And he served on the committee.
And okay, thank you for your service, J.R. Let me go back to hotels a little bit, Bob. I called you during COVID because the McCombs School owns the AT&T Center that you're sitting in today, and I don't know anything about running hotels. I was newly appointed interim dean. I'm a tax accountant. I know how to depreciate things. And asked for your hotel advice. What was that double shock to your business like when COVID shut down travel? And you also owned Gold's Gym at the time. How did you weather that shock to the economy, given that you were in the hospitality industry?
Yeah, it's not, that's not something you ever plan for, obviously. We went through like the 08-09, the Great Recession. Our RevPAR, which is revenue per available room, dropped about 17 or 18%. With COVID, we shut down 52 of our 59 hotels, shut them down. We went from 28,000 or 25,000 employees to 2,500. And just so happens that not only was did the profitability of the hotels go away, but we were building a big hotel. We own and operate our hotels. We were building a big hotel in the Seaport in Boston, 1,000 rooms. We were building a big new hotel in Oklahoma City, and we were building a big resort project in Frisco where the PGA has relocated. So you can't just stop construction. But we burned through $400 million in 1 year. Thank the Lord, literally thank the Lord. We were able to do that. And I said last night, I'm very debt averse. We don't have any corporate debt, and if we had, and a lot of companies that had debt on their hotels, they defaulted through no fault of their own. But we were able to recover. It's not like we didn't, it was hurtful, but our people were unbelievable. We brought them back to work really fast. In fact, when we reopened and tried to restaff our hotels, we couldn't get people to come back to work because they were getting government assistance, and it was hard to restaff. Only in the last 6 months are we really fully staffed. But I said last night, my dad taught me the first 4 letters in bankruptcy are bank. So we're debt averse, and I said last night, I said, I used to be so jealous of office building holders because they got 5-year leases or 7-year leases and 10-year leases, and our leases are one night at a time. And but things change, so it's crazy. Now, I'm not jealous of office building owners anymore.
Well, I live within walking distance of the Omni Barton Creek Resort, which you beautifully renovated a few years back. But I would occasionally text Bob Rowling a picture of the parking lot or the lobby to say, there's people here, things are okay down in Austin, Texas. But I appreciate your advice during you said, watch my labor cost. And I burned through $8 million of reserves because we had some debt service on this building. If you don't mind, I would be interested in a little more of your political views, either geopolitical about energy, or we're running up to a presidential election. Any insights you have for the audience about geopolitical risks that energy is a solution for or is at risk? I know I've had interesting conversations with Senator Hutchison about how important it's been for U.S. national security that the Permian Basin provided so much liquefied natural gas, and it makes us a little less vulnerable to Russia and the Middle East. But anything you want to share about your political outlook on the energy sector?
I'll just stop at this because you don't need my opinions on anything, but I thought it was interesting that in the debates, one of the candidates claimed credit for record energy production in America when, to Bob's point, they haven't been necessarily trying to help that make true, but it's always good to claim credit when things go well, even when you're trying to stand in the way of it. But I do think in our industry, the political risks have always been there. One is markets, frankly. A lot of people say, well, who's your competition? Well, it's generally OPEC plus now, because prices is what matters most, and now it's become much broader than that. It's a domestic shale industry and the natural gas side. But the first job I was in, our company had 2 properties nationalized, 2 companies nationalized overseas that wiped out, in today's terms, what would be tens of billions of dollars of assets with no recompense at all. And so that was the political risk in those days. The political risk today is very different. It's a political risk, and again, Bob referred to some of this, of what is the regulatory policy that attaches to access, to support for industries, and broadly writ, which industries, especially today with the federal government involvement, are they picking as winners? That was not something we did quite to the same extent that we do today, because we not only use tax policy, we actually use mandates, and we use regulatory policy in terms of the transportation sector. To me, that's the biggest risk in the energy business today, no matter what part you're playing in it, because we have to remember there was also incentives for wind and solar back in the 80s, and for things like oil retorting in the Rocky Mountains. When those subsidies were withdrawn, those businesses died. So any of you that are in the energy transition space, it's hard to have this vision of what's going to happen with any degree of accuracy. But one thing you can count on is if it depends on subsidies for too long, it probably isn't a business you want to be in.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would say if you don't think the politics matter or policies matter, last night after we had dinner here, a couple of my friends are here, Mike and Ray. We went back to the Omni and sat in the bar to have a drink, and just so happens the guy waiting on us, he was just a really nice guy, and we just said, well, tell us your story. He says, well, I'm from Venezuela. He said, my family, I've been here 6 or 8 years. My family, I fled. They confiscated our family business. And so if you look back at Venezuela, 40, 50 years ago, it was one of the, I think it's number 6 or 7 per capita most, per capita income, highest in the country. I mean, the world. They were great. And then they elected a bad leader, really bad leader, followed by Maduro, who's now's the bad leader, who's denied the election. So listen to this. In the last 5 or 6 years, 8 million Venezuelans have fled the country. And they've got all the natural resources in the world. They've got huge oil deposits. But my point being is that politics does matter. Look at Venezuela, and it's just an example.
Well, I want to use my closing questions to look more optimistically to the future. We have students both from engineering, Jackson Geosciences, business, policy, all over, interested in the energy sector. What advice do you have for them about why getting a minor in energy business or any other degree that touches energy is a great start to a career that might find its way into hotels? So we've got a bunch of energy students here. Tell us how they should shape themselves as leaders leaving UT.
Just learn about electricity, but don't make that the sole focus of your career. The oil and gas business, for one, will be a very bright future for a very long period of time. You may not feel comfortable hanging around some of your friends at cocktail parties, but there is no industry, and I've touched a bunch of them, that has the romance, the cool intellectual depth of it. You could learn something every single day in the oil and gas business, and can take comfort, in my particular opinion, in the very strong moral purpose that it serves for society. But I think for your own benefit, you should also learn about electricity as much as you can along the way, in case the powers that be make that business go away more quickly than it probably should or would. I think energy is a fabulous field. Generally speaking, it has a high political element, which we just got done speaking about. In most parts of the business, it has a very strong marketing element. In every part of the business, it has a very strong commercial element. And in some cases, a commodities trading element, which is its own little beast. And then it has a high technical component, which for people who are trained technically and have an interest in that, even those that aren't, you just have to sit there and just go, God is good. The world is wonderful. This is how things really work. And the cool thing about that is you can start to see all the myths that are being proffered on the behalf of all of these societies that have nothing to do with the laws of physics, which is its own kind of comfort that you can make your own informed decisions about one of the most important parts of physical existence, right? So energy, food, clean air, clean water, the 4 pillars. Why not be in one of those? And I personally think energy is a great one.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of funny because when I was at Texas and decided to, shortly after, to get into the energy business, the prevailing view among all my father's peers who were geologists and engineers was, you're going to be able to make a living in this business, but your kids can't. It's going to be gone. And then, horizontal drilling came through, and it just, my dad and Mike Popejoy said they leased 200,000 acres in Zapata and Webb County for $1 to $2 an acre back in the early 70s. Most of it's still held by production. And what's happened with technology since then, we drilled Almas wells, which is a shallower formation. They were never very good wells. But they did 60 to 70 MCF a day, and they held the leases. So then here comes the Eagle Ford. and everything just blows up. Now, brand new, they're coming in drilling these Austin chalk wells. So these old Almas wells that would do 50 to 70 MCF a day and hold the leases, now these chalk wells, they're 20 BCF EUR wells, ultimate recovery wells. They're huge, and it's just a brand new play coming through. So I'm very optimistic that if you're a student in this room and you want to get in the energy business, you got a long runway. I'm confident enough that we announced yesterday we're building a hotel in Midland, Texas.
I might add one thing too, is that if I had a choice today, and I'm actually involved in one of these two, be looking out for how you can get involved in advanced modular reactors for nuclear power, because that is the green answer at scale and affordability. The trillions we're putting into other things that don't physically work as well, we could have a bunch of those deployed already. And that's where the future is. The second thing would be in the oceans, because there's unbelievable amounts of three forms of energy at work in the ocean. Obviously, salinity issues, tremendous engineering aspects to that, but that is the other bright future area. It likely is not going to be in wind and solar unless you solve battery storage, energy storage, and if we do that, obviously those things work too.
And I just add exactly so my dad, he was a geology major, but so the nuclear that we use in nuclear plants is fission. But there are some people spending big money on nuclear fusion. And if that's ever becomes economic, then it's game over for energy. And we're going to have more energy than we'll ever need.
Right. Well, when I was a professor, I knew there was always a little bit of benefit to being out of class a few minutes early. And I know this is a room that has conversations to enjoy with each other and phone calls to return. So I'm going to close on this thought. Jay Hartzell jokes that if oil is at 90 and the football team is winning, that life is more fun at the University of Texas. And all I can say is at least the football team is winning. And give a round of applause if you got to go to Michigan to watch that game, because that was so fun. And I hope some of you get a ticket to the UTSA game, because we're going to crush them tomorrow. And that prediction I feel pretty good about. So with that, please help me thank Bob Rowling and Jim Hackett for this conversation.